There's a proliferation of what is often called peer advisory groups, right? You're amongst your peers and creating a safe environment to share things that ordinarily they might not feel comfortable sharing with their board, or even their significant other, right? Or others. There's things that come up in these conversations that, there's a level of intimacy it gets to after a while because there's the trust and, hey, we're all in the trenches. We each have our different challenges that we're wrestling with in our organizations, but there's definitely that trust that builds over time and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And it's difficult for some nonprofit leaders to be vulnerable when they feel like, for example, that they need to have the answers or to be perfect or be strong, be the strong one for their people, right? That's a lot of pressure.
You're listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast with host May Harris.
Well, welcome to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. Today, my guest is Mike Gellman, who is the owner of High Five Career Coaching, and he works specifically with nonprofit executives and leaders. And so welcome to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast, Mike.
Thank you, May.
Yeah, so maybe we can get started just a little bit about yourself. Tell us about how you got into the sector, how you got involved with nonprofits, and really what you're doing with High Five Career Coaching.
Well, nonprofits have been a part of my life for a long time. Career-wise, at the very beginning stages of my career, I worked for the San Diego Zoo. Some of you may be familiar with that.
The world famous San Diego Zoo, right?
The world famous San Diego Zoo. An atypical nonprofit, but a nonprofit nonetheless. And so I started, and then I ended up working for a few other nonprofit organizations from there, as well as in the corporate sector. And so it was a very formative experience working in the nonprofit sector.
Well, and I think it probably has informed your career path somewhat in that now you are consulting and coaching nonprofit leaders and executives, which I think is fantastic. As a business owner, I have a plethora of potential business coaches that I work with. I work with several of them. It's really critical to my work. But I think that nonprofit organizations and leaders might not really think the same way, that they need access to coaches on how to do things. So kind of, how did you make that leap from working in a nonprofit to advising nonprofit leaders?
Yeah. Well, I reached a point in my career where I was most of my career I was in an internal consulting role. So I was coaching leaders, working with teams, helping them resolve conflicts, working on helping to facilitate change within organizations, training, a lot of those types of development things. And after a while, I reached a point. I had an entrepreneurial bug in me. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs and healthcare professionals that were entrepreneurs. And so I wanted to try that out. I needed a change of pace. Quite honestly, I was commuting quite a bit to Los Angeles from San Diego and then from Orange County. So I just, it was a quality of life choice. And my son at the time, I wanted to have more flexibility with him and whatnot. So I made the leap about 7 years ago. And my idea was to really purely focus on the coaching, the career coaching aspect of things. And in reality, my practice migrated back to the executive coaching and team development work that I did internally. And so that's where we are today. And nonprofits in particular are near and dear to my heart and my values. And so I've chosen deliberately to really focus in on the nonprofit sector It's just much more rewarding for me to help support a nonprofit than other businesses.
So the types of executive directors, CEOs, or any executives that come to work with you, what is it that they're seeing? What are the obstacles that you're helping them to overcome?
The biggest obstacle really is ourselves. And so many of them might have a clear idea of where they want to go, and they're just struggling. They're struggling with motivating employees of theirs to carry out their vision for their nonprofit. They're struggling with juggling all the multiple demands and the hats that they have, and trying to make payroll, right? They're looking for where are my revenue streams? Where's my next grant coming from? Or if they're fee for service, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of stress that they have around managing those types of things. So it's not really, to be honest, it's not much different than the corporate sector. And so that's what I bring to my practice. Is I've worked for the Fortune 500 companies that have a lot of resources. And to be honest, May, they have the same conversations, very similar conversations that nonprofit leaders have, about resources. It's a matter of scale, a matter of relativity for sure. But when I went from the nonprofit sector to corporate, I'll never forget my first year there. I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. It's all these great resources.
There's so many resources, exactly.
But you wouldn't know it if you listened to the conversations, right? And the conversations were very similar, and really, so the challenges are often around with nonprofit leaders, like how do we prioritize what we have? What are the next steps we can take to get 5% better, right? Because it can be overwhelming.
Right. And I also think it's not only overwhelming, it can be lonely at the top, especially unless you have a really vibrant, active, but not too active board of directors. Then it can be very, very lonely as an executive director, especially if you're wearing, like you said, multiple hats. You don't have a development director or a COO or anything like that. You're it.
Yeah, which is true. It makes it interesting with a trend that I don't know if you're seeing this, May, but I've been reading about it and running into some people, and actually have someone in one of my mastermind groups for nonprofit CEOs that they co-CEOs, co-executive directors of nonprofits. And I'm not quite sure what's driving the trend other than it's a big job, number one, but it might make it a little less lonely too, right? Having a peer that you can connect with in that way around the unique troubles and stresses of being in that role.
Absolutely. So, I mean, in a entrepreneurial kind of system, that would be, the second in command and the CEO. I have seen this emerging. There are some issues to think through, like, especially if they also have a role on the board. In California specifically, a lot of times we'll get, we'll tag team board meetings and we share a vote. That's the one I think that is so interesting. They try to share a vote, and you can't do that in California. So there could be some unintended consequences of what I actually do think is a good operational advancement. But don't forget to look at your bylaws and consult an attorney if they actually have a seat on your board as well.
Yeah. And, some of them do have a good relationship with one or two board members that they're able to confide in. Which is nice, but there's still that power differential, right? And there's still, as you would know, the fiduciary duties of the board. If push comes to shove, the obligation, right, is to the organization, not to this executive director or CEO of that nonprofit.
Well, and
So,
here's another kind of difference between the for-profit and the nonprofit. They're talking the same thing, thinking lack of resources, but the board members who typically serve on a nonprofit organization haven't run a nonprofit organization before. They might have some accounting experience, so that's what they're doing on the board. They might have program experience, so they're advising on that, or they're just really great community members, right? Which is great. But when you've got an executive who doesn't know how to run a nonprofit or has not done it before, that's like the blind leading the blind in so many situations. So being able, you mentioned your nonprofit mastermind, which I'm happy to be a part of. But you have a group of CEOs and executive directors who basically can act as that sounding board for each other because their board really can't most usually. But why not get together and actually say, have you experienced this problem? Have you experienced this cash crunch? Have you had problems hiring, keeping, retaining? Which I think
yeah,
is maybe why you started it, but maybe you can tell me a little bit about that nonprofit mastermind.
yeah. Well, absolutely, May. As you mentioned earlier, about it can get lonely, and that was certainly a big driver. Is really having a place for some support. And so I personally have been a part of several mastermind groups in the past and have run some before and more in the corporate sector previously. And I've just seen the benefits. So that's something I wanted to bring to our San Diego nonprofit leaders so that they have a place to go. And there's a proliferation of what is often called peer advisory groups, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
amongst your peers and creating a safe environment to share things that ordinarily they might not feel comfortable sharing with their board
Mm-hmm.
or even their significant other, right? Or
Right.
others. There's things that come up in these conversations that there's a level of intimacy it gets to after a while because there's the trust and hey, we're all in the trenches. We each have our different challenges that we're wrestling with in our organizations, but there's definitely that trust that builds over time and allowing yourself to be vulnerable.
Right.
And it's difficult for some nonprofit leaders to be vulnerable when they feel like, for example, that they need to have the answers or to be perfect or be the strong one for their
Mm-hmm.
people, right? That's a lot
Right.
of pressure.
It is. It's a huge amount of pressure, especially, you've got, I always focus on charity regulators and oversight. So you've always got a little bit of fear there. Am I doing everything I need to do, that the IRS says I need to do and the attorney general says I need to do? And am I
Yeah,
doing all of that? But then you've got the pressure from the board that's looking for, results and good money management and coming in under budget. And then you've got the pressure of actually running the program or having your employees. So I think it's awesome to have that kind of peer advisory group for nonprofit leaders. And, I support you wholeheartedly in that.
yeah. Well, I loved having you being a part of the mastermind and other experts, and they do too, right? I mean, it's such a
Hmm.
gift for them, and oftentimes to talk to funders. Like we have someone from a foundation on our team, and boy, how often do you get to have a candid conversation with someone from a foundation without worrying about how they're going to perceive you, right? And to be able to help you better position your organization, right, for success. So
Exactly.
that's kind of what I was hoping to create, and so that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, I think you really have. So, I mean, you've got myself, so legal. You've got a event coordinator who's fantastic, fundraising. You've got Pat Libby, who we've interviewed on the podcast. Talking about
Yep, yep,
advocacy and program development. And then like you said, you have some funders, which again, it shouldn't be a mystery what grantors are looking for to support, but it does seem that way sometimes. It's just a mystery when you're in that CEO seat. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah. There's a lot of self-doubt, right? Being a leader, in those situations, and when there's a lot at stake, right?
Right.
So,
So for, professionals that are kind of coming from the for-profit sector, so they've worked at a company, worked it in business, and they're really not happy or fulfilled, and they are looking at the nonprofit sector in a way that, hey, I can actually transition over, work as an executive for a nonprofit, give back to my community, and actually do work that matters. What are some of the things that you would advise someone like that moving over and kind of changing their career trajectory into the nonprofit sector? Are there things that they should be aware of, when they make that decision?
certainly there's more of a desire for that type of fulfillment, and there's trade-offs, right? So pay, we'll just put that out there, obviously, is one of the
Nothing
biggest
to hide there.
biggest trade-offs. And nonprofits are struggling. They recognize, and during COVID, that became very evident with all the burnout, and many of those in nonprofits saying, you know what, the mission's great, but it's not enough, or not enough anymore. We need to get a equitable wage, and depending where you live, I mean, Southern California is super expensive. Other parts of the country, and it might not be as much pressure, but certainly it is here in Southern California. So certainly that's a factor. One of the things I noticed too is that I used to work for Price Club, which became Costco in the very, very early days, and pre and post merger. And so when I went to the nonprofit sector some years later after that, it was a wake-up call in terms of the resources that you have access to. If you went to a public school or a big university, a big state university, and then you went to a private or small local college, whatever, right? There's a difference in resources. And so there's an adjustment. You may need to do more things by yourself, for example. So if you're coming from the corporate world, if you're used to being a manager and having an assistant, you may not have one in the nonprofit. You're likely not to. So being able to do more, wear more hats. Yeah. It's certainly something just to be prepared for. On a positive note, to be prepared for the impacts you can have with a nonprofit, oftentimes is substantially, the feeling anyway, can be substantially much greater, right? Which is kind of the allure for many of a nonprofit. For many nonprofits that are certainly on the smaller side, San Diego Zoo notwithstanding, being a larger one, but your presence can be felt that much more. There's a lot of opportunity. I think it's a fantastic opportunity to grow. So with some of the career coaching that we do, some people overlook the nonprofit sector as an accelerator for their career because they think, well, I'm not going to get paid as much. I know it'd be great, Mike, but I can't manage it. But again, if you do that for a period of time, there's so much more you can often do in a nonprofit. There's often less bureaucracy as well, and more freedom to try things out. And depending on the organization and the leadership, of course, but it can be a great career accelerator to really take on different responsibilities and rise to that higher level. I mean, many of the millennials or Gen Z, they often want that accelerated path to being a director or higher. And they're so frustrated within the corporate sector because it takes time. It might take 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, that's not unusual. But they're thinking within a few, right, in their mind. And I did too, to be honest, at that age, until then I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking? I totally wasn't ready.
Wait, I want to manage other people. I can't manage myself. Like, what was I thinking? Yeah, I I'm
Yeah.
right there with
So
you.
I think some of it's perspective. It's not purely just generational. So I'm not trying to paint a generation because I'm, you know, an Xer, squarely a Gen Xer. And I remember thinking, yeah, I could be a director of human resources when I was in my early 20s. And I felt I had all the knowledge. I mean, I knew it would be a stretch, but I felt, oh, yeah, I could do that. But then looking back, I'm like, oh, no, there's no way I could have at that time, for sure. So,
But
yeah, back to
to that
yeah,
point, which is, you do have stereotypically a little bit more freedom in a nonprofit structure than you would in big business. You have a little bit more, I don't know, I guess freedom to try new things out, see if they'll work. Now, you might not have the resources and it might be like out of the budget, but I do think there is a lot more opportunity for free, kind of experimentation in a way. And, it is the Gen Zers and the millennials, not the Gen X's, that can take the job at the compensation that's typically set. It's, yeah, you might be a director of human resources for a nonprofit, small nonprofit, but you're making just over minimum wage because that's what the nonprofit can afford at this particular time. So
right.
if you are hungry and you are a good self learner and willing to put in the time, I think you can leapfrog over. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I think you really can.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I was working at the zoo, I was with Father Joe's Villages for a while as well. I mean, the amount of experience I gained in a relatively short period of time was tremendous. It would have
Mm-hmm.
taken me a lot longer in a corporate setting to get that breadth and depth of experience. And so much of my career, to be honest, I've often been working with those more senior to me and
Mm-hmm.
operating at that level. And I credit that mostly just to the experiences I had early on in my career. I mean, certainly with my upbringing, and I started working when I was 8 years old, so I got a head start. But um, but really, the nonprofit sector, yeah, I had a great opportunity to do many things that I ordinarily would not have at that stage in my career. So,
Right. And you don't have to answer to shareholders, which is always a good thing in a nonprofit. You, you
well,
know?
yeah, that's certainly a challenge. Um, Certainly, there's often, board members with their pet projects and things of that nature that you need to negotiate, right?
Right.
Whether you're the CEO of the nonprofit or whether you're a director of wherever you are in the nonprofit, there's the ripple effects. But people are people, and
Hmm.
so you kind of have to manage that.
Right. Well, excellent point. Okay. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience, Mike?
Well, I guess the other thing on that note is with the limited resources, there's certainly the avenue for forming partnerships. And
Yeah.
that's been a wonderful thing that I've been witness to with nonprofits partnering with each other and dovetailing their resources. And um, I lead these, I think you may know, these nonprofit networks.
Hmm.
So there's informal networking opportunities for those in San Diego. And it's been great to see some of these partnerships form, right? And
Right.
where they're able to combine resources, and that's another avenue is reaching outside of your organization to
Right.
tackle challenges together that they may have and serve your common populations together.
I
So
think it takes a very savvy and confident leader to do that, which more and more nonprofit leaders are getting that confidence, because I think before, when I was an executive director, at least the feeling was that you were always in competition with each other. It's like, no, I can't work with that organization. They're going for the same donor dollars that I am. So why would I want to work with them? And over the past 20 years, I think that has changed phenomenally. Like, no, you are better together. It's not going to be us or them. It could be together. We can do so much more together. And I think funders are encouraging that more and more, especially in light of COVID.
Yeah.
So if you can put aside the competition, the innate competition that might be part of your psyche, and say, no, I want to partner with this nonprofit. I want to work with them. If they succeed, I succeed. If you can do that, you can go so much farther.
Yeah, I think if we have time, just one example that comes to mind of that I've really been impressed with are 3 healthcare organizations, nonprofits: Vista Community Clinic, True Care, and San Ysidro Health. Now, they serve similar populations. They each, of course, have their own bents, their own strengths, their niche, but they partner on a good number of things. And it's really benefits the patients, right? The clients, the patients that need those services. And I was really impressed. So ordinarily I would have thought, wow, aren't you concerned, about getting your grant dollars or this or that? And, the more I talk with them, the more I'm learning, well, no, actually, it actually helps both of us because of this, right? And so it's wonderful to see. And I think it strengthens not only those organizations, but our community at large. So it's counterintuitive, but to your point.
But I also think there's
beneficial.
more opportunity for nonprofits like that to work together, especially if there's some kind of economy of scale that you can integrate. So maybe they could all share a similar back office. Now, haven't worked with these guys, but I've worked with other organizations that, like, why do we need to put the same systems into place, the same payroll, the same everything, when we could actually have economy of scale and share a back office? And that has worked fantastic.
Yeah, no, that's great. In fact, that's Balboa Park, right? The Balboa Park Cultural Partnership. You're familiar with them.
Right.
I remember when that got started.
Me too.
And they were like, well, do you? Yeah. So I was at the zoo at the time, and I remember, I don't know if you remember Bob Smith was part of that, or David Lang, but anyhow, they were at the beginning of that and said, yeah, why don't we get together and we can start with maybe just making purchases in bulk and save money, for the things that we need, right? Even just starting there. Or, and now I think it's probably endless, the things that they collaborate on with the back office types of things.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the thing to learn is, thinking out of the box, that you don't need to be siloed as a nonprofit founder or leader. It's not just you against the world, and it's not all on you to solve this particular problem. There are others in the community that are also working on this that are more than happy, usually, to work with you and partner with you. So a great point. I'm glad you shared it, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a wonderful, opportunity for us to kind of just have this conversation. And I really appreciate you being on the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, May. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Nonprofit Counsel Podcast. Are you ready to lead with clarity and confidence? Head to nonprofitcounsel.com to find the tools you need to start smart, lead strong, and create lasting impact.